Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Folded geography. So I heard stories that there are places where the world's geography is folded in on itself, like if you take a piece of paper and fold part of it over so that there is something hidden in the crease. These places can't be accessed by normal travel and don't appear on any maps, but sometimes, very, very rarely, people end up there by accident. These places are formally called non-errats, or sometimes just called folds. The world has hundreds of them. I'm going to tell you about a relatively well-known one in the USA that travelers sometimes stumble across. If you're driving through the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, normally you might expect a 2.6-mile-long journey on a single-lane path, originally built for trains but modified to also allow cars, with only one exit at either end, each trip taking at least 6 minutes. Naturally, there are no radio signals down there. Well, once every few years, the tunnel will unfold for an unlucky traveler. The track will seem to stretch on forever, well past 2.6 miles. After a certain point, the ceiling lights will suddenly go dark, and there won't be any other cars in sight. You'll hear nothing but your own echoes for miles, and see nothing but what your headlights can reveal. There is not enough room to turn around, but you might try to reverse out of the tunnel. However, in the pitch black, it's a difficult task to navigate using only your taillights. If you choose to progress further forwards, you'll travel for miles, just spiraling deeper, deeper, deeper into the earth. And God help you if your car breaks down. Eventually, you'll start to hear another sound, faint at first, but it grows louder the deeper in you go, escalating until it is an unbearable screech, like nails scraping on metal. Here, in the heart of the tunnel, you'll reach an underground facility. No staff, no power, just a big metal door, and that hideous noise coming from within. If you look closely at the door, you'll see it rattling. And if you dare to walk up to it and press your ear against it, you'll realize that whatever is making that noise is scraping against the door itself. Nobody has ever tried to open the door, and that is probably wise. If you continue onwards, you will begin to feel like you are trapped in an endless loop. But just as suddenly as the lights went out, they will come back on, and you will shortly after leave the tunnel to the other side, with apparently no time having passed between the time the lights went out and when they went on again. The next time you use the tunnel, you will find it to be completely normal. There are other stories of folded locations, stories of abandoned highway side towns and even abandoned streets in the middle of major cities. The only constant feature between non-errats is the sound of scratching coming from somewhere within, which you are advised to avoid. If you've ever seen a non-errat town, you will instantly understand why.
I had a really bad case of collapsing sense of reality once. I was raised to believe in an unrealistic image of excellence. That part still holds to this day, and I had been striving a lot to surpass my average town high school background. I did not know the average person sucked even at uni. I overcompensated my skewed worldview. My mother lied to me about my siblings. One that was a slacker in my eyes supposedly had stellar grades as all my other siblings, and I didn't bother asking Dad about it and finding out Mum lied until years later. To tie up this tangent and backstory, I entered college with the first year's course material already mastered, but my youth suffered. Health, socials, teenage experiences. I was pretty average in high school regarding the social rankings, had my friends and my foes. One being a rather laid-back dude that developed a disdain for me because I consistently disapproved of him and his decisions. No extreme hate on my part, just, I'd disapprove, but do your thing. Consistency is key, and in spite of never being in conflict, our diverging worldviews eventually made us spit in each other's presence, figuratively speaking. One time when I was 16, after a full week of interweaving the normal high school kids' workload with my unhealthy habit of binge-reading general textbook and internet until the early morning hours, my head just gave out on Saturday morning, and I passed out for almost a full day of sleep. I pulled a 20-hour-long uninterrupted sleeping session, had some weird dreams, not nightmares, but nothing pleasant either. The next few days before I recovered were confusing. The barrier between vivid dreams and tired wakefulness collapsed. I dreamed of failing tests I prepared for and passing ones I estimated I would fail. I had random dreams of walking in empty streets. I dreamed of getting into conflict with people I didn't like, right in the classroom. But I know almost for sure those things I just listed were dreams. The more obvious signs were that my hands and forearms were sometimes black talons instead, glowing eyes of some people, and whatnot. Most misplaced memories I identify as dreams are characterized by a loss of causality, multiple compound déjà vu events. Generally, the memory plays out like a randomly skipping record or something. The problem is that the guy I described before off himself this time, and I dreamed of his death. The dream itself was one of those obvious dream sequences that was chock full of supernatural things. The black hands, weird coloration, even the sun and moon were wrong. The guy jumped off a bridge and drowned without a parting note or any indication as to what is wrong. His family blames his subpar grades, that he eventually realized he was screwing himself over and an hero. But I dreamed I met him, tackled him, displayed superhuman reflexes where I avoided getting hit and getting obvious signs of a fight on my body. I managed to get room to swipe his knee from the side and smash his head against the guardrail. He fell unconscious, and I threw him in the river with my black hands and walked home in the sunrise after a moonlit night. I do not know to this day whether I did it or not. The body's injuries have been explained as consequences of the long fall.
If you live in Toronto, you might have heard urban legends about Scratch Street. This is not the street's real name. Nobody knows what that might be because the street signs are all scratched out and illegible. It sometimes just appears as a side street off a busy road, and most people will ignore it on their daily business, unless they've heard the legend and are inclined to explore. The street appears to have architecture from the 60s to 80s, run down, with abandoned urban housing and low-rise apartment blocks, and empty streets looking quite out of place in a thriving city. If you venture in, you'll see that not only are street signs scratched out, but so are house numbers. All intersections on Scratch Street, except the one you entered through, will be intersections of Scratch Street on Scratch Street, both signs defaced in the exact same way. Deep in, the entire neighborhood becomes a maze with no way to tell where you are or where you were or where you are going. And the thing about Scratch Street is, somehow it's expanding. In early urban explorer accounts in the 90s, it was just a single lane ending in a cul-de-sac. Now it encompasses multiple city blocks, including an old high school somewhere at its center. Perhaps one day it will be an entire city unto itself, just endlessly expanding, absorbing forgotten urban places into itself, or maybe bleeding out and annexing surrounding communities of confused citizens who can no longer find their way home from work one day. If you stay the night in Scratch Street, it is said that the sound of scratching permeates the town after sundown, like someone scraping the letters off a street sign. Nobody has ever stayed the full night and returned. That sound of scratching, it gets ever closer, no matter where you stay. Attempts to overnight inevitably result in a panic dash down the maddening, labyrinthine urban environment until an exit is found. Those who haven't reached safety by morning give up on ever finding them again. Those who have explored the houses during the day will find that some of them show signs of having been abandoned as if in the middle of daily life. Beds still made, kettles still on stoves, disgusting lumps of petrified food in the pantries. Look hard enough, and an explorer will occasionally see the gruesome fates of those who lived here. Hiding inside closets, under beds, in attics and crawl spaces, every now and then you see the mummified corpse of someone, with their faces clawed completely off. Who these people were, nobody knows. There are no records of mass disappearances in Toronto. It is as if their very existence was obliterated from memory. Nothing can ever identify them.
Hey/X/. So Brit here, I live in a town called Abingdon in Oxfordshire. It's a pretty old town, considered to be one of the oldest towns in Britain apparently. Probably about the only interesting thing you can say about it. Aside from the weird yearly festival where people throw buns off the top of a tower in the town centre, but hey, British people have weird traditions. So I work in one of the many pubs around town, and generally to the closing shifts that end around 2 a.m. most nights. Because I live within a short walking distance from the pub, I walk to and from work rather than drive. For the past couple of years, I have had no issue with doing so. I just stick my earphones in, play some music, and walk the empty streets, and a small stretch of woodland to get home. Takes about 10 minutes, and I rarely bump into any weirdos on the way. Over the past week, however, weird shit has been happening within that small stretch of woodland. I'm going to list off the 5 incidents that have happened to me over this week, in the hopes that you guys can help me shed some light on what exactly it is I saw. So first weird incident. I was walking along the pathway with only the dim lights from people's windows through the trees, lighting my way. Not really bothered by it, as this was the norm for me, had my music playing, so even if any spooky sounds did happen, I wouldn't hear them, and everything was going as normal at first. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a humanoid-looking figure in the woodland. I'd normally have just dismissed this as some drunk guy taking a piss or something, but there was something unsettling about it. It was almost illuminated with a pale white glow. I turned to get a better look, and I saw that it was a male figure. No shirt on, but it was wearing jeans, no hair at all, and was white as a sheet. He was facing away from me, but that dim glow around him made me curious, so I stopped and stared a while longer. The guy then began to turn his head to face me, but then just faded into nothing. I immediately shat bricks and ran home, unsure of what exactly I had just seen, but not really caring to find out at the time. Second incident. This wasn't the very next day, as I had the day after off, and stayed as far away from the park and woodland as I could. Weird shit still fresh in my mind the night before. It was 2 days after I had seen the spectral figure of a man in the woods. Like an idiot, I assumed it would just be a one-off, and decided to once again take the same route home. This time, I decided to not have my music on, because I wanted to conserve battery. I had forgotten to charge it before work, and it was pretty low on juice, so I was taking my usual route as before, and without anything to drown out the spooky ambient noises of the night, I begin to hear a low-pitched droning noise coming from the same patch of woods that I had heard it in previously. It sounded a little like nails on a chalkboard, but a lower pitch, and from further away, I didn't want to look, but curiosity got the better of me, and I once again turned my head. Sure enough, that same shirtless figure was there again, his back once again to me. This time he seemed to be levitating. His feet were off the ground, and his toes pointing downward to the foliage beneath him, his arms just hanging in place as he let out a kind of spluttering, choking noise. The droning sound got a little louder as I took a couple of steps closer to get a better look. An echoed sigh could then be heard as he faded away one more time, along with the noises. I was scared, naturally, but also intrigued at this point. I had stumbled across an area with a fair amount of paranormal activity, and though I had goosebumps, heart palpitations, and shortness of breath from what I had just witnessed, I couldn't help but want to see more. Third incident. The following night, I was actually eagerly awaiting the walk home to see what would happen next. When the time came, I was sure to take my earphones out and listen for any more sounds, and look out for any more sights as I ambled down the woodland path. The droning noise came back once again, this time sounding more like low-frequency tinnitus, a lot less painful on the ears to listen to. I immediately ran over to the spot I had been standing the previous 2 encounters. Disappointingly, there were no visuals this night, however the sounds were definitely still there. I could hear the coughing and spluttering from the tree he had been floating by, fainter than the night before, but still very audible. This time, however, there was a childlike humming accompanying it. Not any tune I was familiar with, but it definitely sounded like a young girl, or a very young boy's voice. It also sounded rather happy. I waited for quite some time in the hopes that I'd see something again, but no such luck. The sound stopped after a while and I just left to go home. Fourth incident. 2 days after the third incident, as I had no activity at all the night before this. There wasn't much wind that night, certainly not enough to blow the foliage around in the woods. But as I walked past, practically every bush or tree branch rustled around like crazy. I didn't see the man this night. I did, however, see a new figure altogether. Peeping out at me from behind one of the trees was a little girl. Much like the man, she glowed faintly, making her easy to spot. She had long pale hair in pigtails and wore a flowing pink dress. Her eyes met mine as I passed her, and she immediately hid behind the tree. I sensed nothing bad from her, so I wanted to go and look to see if she was still there, but the atmosphere in that area just seemed ominous tonight. I'm still unsure of who the man I saw previously is, but something about him makes me feel uneasy, so I'd rather not go too close to the area he had been stood and floating. The hum from the previous incident could be heard once more though, as a few more bushes and bits of foliage shook aggressively. Final incident so far. So this was the following night, and the last time I have walked through that stretch of woodland during the night. I will be going back there once I've calmed down a little. But this was an unpleasant incident and one I don't care to repeat anytime soon. So I got to the pathway leading through the woods, and before even starting, something didn't feel right. I had an overwhelming sense of fear and dread come over me out of nowhere, so I dawdled through contemplating whether or not to put my music on and just ignore everything. I decided that I would do so if I got too creeped out, so I was slowly walking down, anxious and on edge, as I heard what sounded like that same child's voice, but this time it wasn't humming, it was crying. I look over to see the little girl and the fan stood by the same tree I had seen him at previously. Once again, he was levitating and sounded like he couldn't breathe. The little girl had her hands over her face, sobbing helplessly into them. As I stood still and watched, a bottle landed on the pathway next to me and smashed. I didn't see where it had came from, but the minute it did, the girl looked over in my direction and let out a loud, blood-curdling scream at me, before running towards me with a look of pure demonic rage. Naturally, I legged it, running through the path as all the plant life angrily rustled at me, and things could be heard being thrown around behind me. The droning was back, and it was louder than ever, ringing through my ears like it was in my head or something. So the fifth and final incident fucked me up pretty badly. I've been taking the longer route home for the past few nights because I don't want to go back there, at least not for a while and definitely not at night. I don't know what these were. If they were ghosts, they looked relatively solid. If they were demons, then why take such human-esque guises? Though the shrieks and look of that little girl on the fifth incident was what could only be described as demonic.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Pic related, it's a picture of my bedroom at my father's house. Disclaimer. This is going to be a very long and convoluted story, detailing multiple events in my life. Around the age of 12, I moved into a new house with my abusive, drug-addicted father. He bought it cheaply off of my grandfather. The house had been in our family for a while. My great-aunt had been the last owner of it, who died 16 years beforehand. Living with my father, I scarcely felt comfortable leaving my room, and stayed isolated there most of my teenage years. About 2 weeks after moving in, I heard a noise outside of my window. It was an impossibly deep growling sound, similar to a rumble. I laid there frozen. It happened off and on periodically throughout the night. In the morning, I'd have to walk to my bus stop. I lived in a rural area, so the walk was about 25 minutes and lined with trees on both sides. I never felt secure. At first, I had my mother buy me an old MP3 player with shitty earphones so I could cope with the paranoia. Eventually, I'd hear snaps and cracks even through the earphones and had to sing to myself or speak loudly to push away the fear or whatever was following me. I developed a habit of singing and narrating when afraid or worried that persists to this day. I lived in that house for 6 years, and the noise I'd hear at night would happen almost every night without fail. About 5 months after settling in, we got a kitten. For some reason, the cat only felt secure in my bedroom, only leaving for short periods of time. Even his litter box had to be moved to my bedroom. One day, my father forced the cat outside against its will. He wanted it to be a hunting cat, to catch moles and rats. This was his second time outside. Later on, I was in my room and my cat still hadn't come in yet. I was worried and waited for my father to come in. I asked him and he told me he'd seen the cat run off over a hill in the distance where some dirt trails were. 3 hours passed. Still no cat. Feeling anxious, I grabbed a flashlight and ran out looking for him. I ran quickly over the hill, shaking and looking around for him. Once I reached the dirt trail, I slowed down and searched around. Nothing. I kept walking and eventually heard Light meowing a little ahead of me and spotted my cat lying on his side on the road. I knelt down next to him and ran my hand along his side. My hand was wet. I shined the light on it, only to find blood on my hand. I quickly bundled the cat in my arms and went to run back to the house. For a moment, I was frozen stiff, thinking that whatever attacked him could still be there, watching me. I screamed and ran back to my house. Inside, we looked at the cat's wound. It was a thin, clean cut along the side of his body, which you couldn't tell at first due to the nature of his fur. It looked as though somebody cut my cat with a knife. My father, generally against all medical and professional help, didn't want to take him to a vet or hospital or somewhere. Instead, we bandaged him up and hoped he'd be okay overnight. He was dead when I woke up in the morning. After 2 years, we got 3 dogs, Mo, Curly, and Larry. They were chained outside to trees encircling the house. One of the trees was right outside of my bedroom. This was Curly's tree. When receiving them, all 3 puppies were happy and normal. They were healthy pit bulls. As time passed, everybody started to notice that Curly, though, the dog who was chained outside of my window, became increasingly more timid and frightful. The growling still persisted at this time, but I often just drowned it out with endless daydreams, singing to myself and oversleep. I largely attributed Curly's disposition to the growling creature. When people would come toward him, he'd duck down and put his head on the ground, whimpering. If you moved too quickly, he'd dart back to his dog box. The other 2 dogs were fine, and there was no history of animal abuse. Socially awkward and without guidance, I never had friends over. I was the only one who was aware of this noise for the longest time. Around 15, my father started dating a girl named Charlie. They fought on a regular basis and rarely got along. One night, my dad's girlfriend was down in my bedroom crying. My father had punched her earlier. I was too numb to console her at this time, but as she was telling me her story, she stopped and told me there was something growling outside my window. This confirmed to me that I wasn't crazy. From a young age, I would go stay at my mother's house every other weekend. This continued until I was 18, and I never experienced anything paranormal during my time there. Around the summer of my 16th birthday, my mom moved me into a new room at her house. It was the guest room. My mother had lived with her boyfriend since I was 7, and I'd never really been in this room much until then. It always felt kind of off, and my PC was in my room, so I never felt like staying in other rooms much. One night, while I was asleep, I woke up to a feeling of something lightly gripping my arm. Becoming immediately aware of the danger I felt I was in, I didn't move and pretended to be asleep. It felt like a hand lightly gripping my arm, then releasing. I pretended to roll over in my sleep, and the sensation stopped, as if it simply disappeared. About 2 weeks after it first happened, I was woken up in the middle of the night to what felt like multiple hands squeezing my body lightly. My arms, my neck, my thigh. I couldn't help but imagine that there was a creature with multiple arms hovering over me. I ignored the feeling and pretended to roll over again. They phased through me yet again. The next time it happened, I laid awake with my eyes open, staring directly out into the pitch-black night. It didn't stop. I don't think it noticed my eyes were open. I closed them and rolled over again. Finally, I devised a plan to try witnessing whatever it was that was bothering me. I tied yarn to the chain hanging down from my chandelier, which I was going to attempt to pull on to turn on the light if I felt something. I tested it a few times during the day, and with a little effort, it worked. Before going to sleep that night, I tied the string around my hand a few times, where my hand was even a slight bit elevated when I fell asleep. Sure enough, it happened again. This time, I took a deep breath and pulled the string while immediately leaping up in my bed and momentarily yelling. Just as the times when I rolled over, the feeling immediately vanished. There was nothing there, and the feeling never happened again. Fast forward a few months, and I was out in the living room with my mother and older brother. We had some similar tastes in music, so we were just sitting there listening to an album we all lived together. It was around 11 p.m. at night. Suddenly, we heard something loud on the porch outside. It sounded like a bunch of animals had quickly scurried up onto the porch and were maneuvering around aimlessly, then left. More appropriately, or in my imagination, I'd always imagined some demonic-looking animal with 6 to 8 legs scurrying up on the porch. My mom grabbed her rifle and went outside hesitantly. My brother and I were right behind here. There was nothing there. After this incident, we were all shaken up a bit, and my mother went downstairs for a long smoke break. I was told to go hang out in my room for a bit. About an hour later, I came back to find my brother sitting alone at the kitchen table. He asked me to come outside on the porch and talk with him for a bit. My mom was still in the basement. Outside, my brother told me that he'd been hiding something from me for a while, that he always felt like something was following me or watching me. He told me a story about something that happened when I was a kid. Apparently, when I was about 4 years old, I had a stuffed animal dog that I enjoyed a lot. I can't remember it well, but it doesn't seem too far-fetched. One day, my stuffed animal went missing. I pestered my brother, who is 12 years older than me, to look for it over and over. He spent the day ignoring me until he finally decided to look for it. It was later at night, probably about 9 p.m. He told me that when he went to look under my bed, he saw a pair of yellow eyes looking back at him. He freaked out and ran down the stairs. The next morning, him and my mother looked under my bed, and there was my stuffed animal, which was torn to shreds. Around this time, my mom came out onto the porch with us. My brother asked for her validation on the story, which she agreed on, and told me a bit about how he had ran downstairs petrified to the kitchen, and they had a long talk that night about things. After this conversation, they both started acting more depressed and distant for the rest of night, so I just went back to my room, and soon enough forgot about the event. About a year later, I was at my mom's house, sitting at my computer one night playing games. The growling had still persisted throughout the years while I was at my father's house, but I'd become largely desensitized to it. Anyway, while I was sitting there continuing my game, I suddenly heard this loud screeching noise. It sounded as if it were coming from right outside of my window, as if some large bird was screeching or something were dragging claws down the glass. I froze, paralyzed to my chair until it stopped. I couldn't even move my hand from my mouse. When it stopped, I lunged for my phone and quickly ducked down below my window, afraid of what might happen, but feeling an intense desire to know what it was. I started slowly pulling the curtain aside when I heard it again. Louder this time since I was closer now. I immediately called a close friend of mine who I'd told stories of my experiences to before. I asked him if he could hear it too, and slid my phone a little up the curtain. He agreed. Right when I pulled my phone away from the curtain, though, the noise stopped again. I looked in the morning, and there was no damage to my window. In fact, I actually have a screen on the outside of my window, so nothing could have scratched on it anyway. To this day, we still talk about the sound from time to time. Just a few weeks later, I was lying in my bed one night at around midnight. This was at my mother's house again. All lights were out and it was pitch black. My body was starting to get comfortable enough to fall asleep, but I was still awake, actively thinking about various issues in my life. Without any sort of warning, my room suddenly lit up a bright bluish-white color. I immediately sat up in my bed and backed up against the wall, confused. Not at all likely, but I thought maybe a car had pulled up outside of my bedroom or something. Regardless, I was too scared to move. After a few seconds, though, my room was suddenly back to normal and dark. It felt as if I'd blinked, and everything was dark again, although I don't recall blinking at that moment. I leaped for my lamp and turned it on, not sleeping for the rest of the night. No experiences like this ever happened again or before. However, I was recently reading on X and noticed other people who'd gone through similar experiences, which is actually what has provoked me to explain all of this. About a year and a half later, I was walking home from my girlfriend's house. I was almost 18 and soon would be moving out of my father's house. My life had normalized a bit, considering I was too old to be thrown around easily, and had overcome multiple stages of numbness and acceptance with everything around me, including my paranormal experiences. I was breaking out of the shells of my isolation, and was generally a happier person. It was during the winter of 2011, and the snow was far too high to drive through. It was a decently lengthy walk, probably about 75 minutes, but nothing I wasn't unfamiliar with. As I started nearing my house, though, I heard sounds coming from the woods. It was that same low, growling sound I hadn't heard anywhere but outside of my dad's house. The streets were completely empty, and I felt as if I were the only person alive for miles. This didn't frighten me too much, though, because for some reason, I felt more empowered tonight. As I walked, I didn't put earphones in and try blocking out the sound or ignoring it. Instead, I walked home actively questioning and talking to the creature. After all these years, it's amazing, but I'm really not afraid of you anymore. Why me, though? Why have you spent all of these years stalking me? The more I started talking, the less I heard the growling. Soon it felt like I was talking to myself, and surely I would have seemed as if I were to anybody who could have been there. I need to move on with my life now, and I need you to move on also. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Leave me alone. I eventually reached a point where I was chanting, "Leave me alone. I'm done with you. I'm not going to stand for this any longer," and other things as I neared my home. From that point onward, all of the growling stopped. I got home and almost immediately went to sleep. I slept peacefully for the last few months at my father's house before moving. I felt relieved, but have never been able to forget the sound that plagued me for such a large portion of my life. I still think of it from time to time, and still feel shivers up my spine when I walk empty streets alone at night, remembering the sound. There are a few other important details about my life that I'd like to share. My mother was burned badly in a fire when she was 6 years old. One of my uncles accidentally pushed her into the open furnace they had. She had to get skin grafted onto her back and legs due to the burns. I'd also learned around the age of 17 that my father, the one I'd grown up with, wasn't my real dad. My real father had died 3 months before I was born in a car accident, and I was raised by the father I'd known because he was dating my mother after and before his death, and had a much more stable job than my mother as well as court connections. My mother was also hit by a car while 3 months pregnant with me. I never asked too much about the damage done, but I do know that she was in a wheelchair when she gave birth to me, and in pictures soon afterward also. I'd talked to my brother a few times since then, until he got arrested a few years ago, and he'd always claimed to me that he felt I shouldn't have been born. Not in an aggressive way, but with all of the things that happened to my parents. He was my half-brother, though, who had a different father as me, with no unusual proceedings leading up to his birth. And that's pretty much the end of my story for the moment. I've had some very unusual dreams featuring a dark replica of myself that seem almost too vivid to be dreams, which I could explain if they seem related, but for the moment, these are all of the strange experiences that have happened.
Finished night class in Honolulu. School is located on 4th Street. Is around 8 p.m. raining. Parking is a pain in Honolulu, so I take the bus to and from school. Next bus is at 9:30. Raining too hard to wait at the bus stop bench. Try to wait in the building's lobby. Half an hour passes. School's fat security officer notices me and tells me to leave 'cause too late after hours. Damn it, .jpg. Explain to Paul Blart it's raining too hard for me to wait at the bus stop and I'm afraid of getting shanked by methed up hobos who come out at night. Guy tells me he's sorry, but due to policy I cannot be in the building. Tell me I'm welcome to wait under the awning at the door's entrance. Go outside. Instantly blood freezes. Not due to it being night and raining, but it feels like eyes are on me. Check time, only 8:34. Standing alone in the entryway when suddenly a rock is flung at me from my left. Rock now at my feet is covered in layers of fuzzy moss and mud. Look in the direction. Only thing there is the opening to an alleyway. Alleyway is too small for a person to normally walk through. You need to stand sideways and shimmy through. Click, click, clack. Another rock is tossed out of alleyway towards the road. Nope out, not getting mugged by a crazy hobo hiding in a gnome alleyway. pull up a banana yellow rain jacket and start walking in the opposite direction. Get 30 feet and hear shuffling behind me. Not footsteps, but the sound of something being dragged across concrete. Turn around to see something instantly vanish back into the alleyway. Full sprint away. Whenever I look away, the dragging starts again. Figure evades my vision each time I turn my head, always has something to hide behind. Run down empty streets, which is really strange for Honolulu. Reach a place called Walker Park, close to a more populated area. Sound stops, but I still don't feel safe. The entire area feels wrong, no other way to describe it other than macabre. It's like I should not be there, like I do not belong there. Feel nauseous and have a sudden splitting headache. Then I see it. Then I fucking see it. Standing on the street opposite of me, standing under a streetlight, is this headless monster of a man. It had to be at least 6 feet tall without a head. Blood is gushing from this horrible stump of a neck, totally covering it in blood down to its torso. It takes a step forward, closer to the street between me and this thing. I freeze, unable to move. My headache intensifies to the point where I want to cry like a bitch. Another step. My blood freezes and then boils over as everything tells me to run, but I can't. Another step, and another. The thing is in the middle of the road now. This road is always busy, no matter what time of night, but there's abso-fucking-lutely nothing. Panicking, I haphazardly take a step backwards, unable to look away from whatever I'm looking at. Click, click, clack. Another rock lands at my feet, and then another and another. Then a rock hits the back of my head. Something is behind me throwing these rocks. Too afraid to even back up, I completely fucking lose it and scream in terror as loud as I can. As I scream, a car comes down the road with this headless freak in its way, and it just melts away just before the car collides with it. It's gone, and now there are several cars stopped at a red light. Book it far, far away, walk at least 1.5 miles to get to the most crowded bus stop I can find. Later on the bus, I reach into my pocket and find one of those moss-covered stones. Later I found out that in that particular area of the city was a heiau, temple shrine, to the war god where the ancient Hawaiians performed human sacrifices. The method of sacrifice: decapitation.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.